This is Viva Fry.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
Hey, this is Brad Wall.
This is JP Sears.
Hi, this is Frank Peretti.
This is Tammy Peterson.
This is Danielle Smith.
This is James Lindsay.
Hey, this is Brett Kissel, and you're listening to the Sean Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. How's everybody doing today? Yes, we're talking some junk silver. Yes, we're talking older circulation coins like dimes, quarters, half dollars, and dollars. And you're like, why are we talking about this stuff? Because we have King Carney now, right? We got Carney. He's been coronated, folks. That's why we're talking. Like, did you ever think we'd be talking about older circulation coins? Nope. Under this liberal government, yep. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Because why? Just in case you need to have a little bit of a sleep at night insurance policy. And, it goes in different varying levels. It's like, oh, I need a little bit of silver. Oh, maybe a piece of gold. Okay, yeah, and a little bit of that. Oh, and then this guy gets in, and you're like, I don't know. I'm just gonna pick up some junk silver. It might become the best junk I ever pick up, And like I say, I'm always an optimist, but I'm looking at this guy going, ugh, he's making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and that's why I go to Silver Gold Bull. They got junk silver right now, exclusively a deal for you, the listener. And all you got to do is text or email Graham for details about this feature or any other questions you may have around buying, selling, storing, or using your retirement accounts to invest in precious metals. So just silvergoldbull.ca.com. Go down in the show notes, reach out to Graham, and he'll get you hooked up. Anytime you're buying anything, just make sure to reference the SNP. Profit River. Well, I mean, as Carney's doing everything, his predecessor, and now, it's just like this liberal government trying to take all your guns, everything else. It's like you're going to get some junk silver. Maybe reach out to Joel. Maybe just, I had one listener immediately went and bought a shotgun. Now, hunting purposes, obviously, nothing nefarious, folks. Legally, that's what we're doing here. But you're like, the temperature just kind of went up a little bit again. All right, well, maybe reach out to Joel. And the nice thing about what Profit River's done is we've streamlined a little bit. So you're going to jump past just the first, the receptionist. You're going to go right to their phone and internet sales manager. That's Joel. And all you got to do is email snp@profitriver.com. You can also hop on profitriver.com and go look at what they have. You can do it over the phone, internet, in person. Just any purchases you make sure to reference the Sean Newman Podcast. You get entered in for a $100 gift card at the store. And, it doesn't matter where you're at in Canada, folks. They are the major retailer of firearms, optics, and accessories. They serve all of Canada. And certainly with the times we're in, maybe, just maybe, go take a little peek for yourself. RecTech. For over 20 years, they've been committed to excellence in the power sports industry. When it comes to springtime, you're looking for a side-by-side, a quad, all the different things out there. Maybe you're thinking about swinging those clubs and you're thinking about maybe a golf cart. Just saying. It's there. They got deals that can help. Can-Am has some deals that can help farmers, business owners, and you should ask Ryan about that as well. You should stop out to the west side of Lloydminster and talk to Ryan, tell him I sent you, or go to rectechpowerproducts.com and you can do a little digging around. I suggest their showroom. Their showroom is top-notch. Planet.com. When you're busy running a growing business, check. Trying to stay on top of the ever-changing world of information, check. Technology can be overwhelming to say the least, check. Let them take care of you by leaving you to do what you need to do, and they'll take care of you. It's a nice little win-win. For over 22 years, Planet.com has been here to boost your productivity by proactively managing every aspect of your IT infrastructure, both in-house and in the cloud. This ensures you're not too tangled up in technology to get anything done. That's why I got them building the new SNP website, hopefully one that doesn't get hacked by the Chinese or whoever it is, Chinese betting site these days. Go to planetcom.ca for more information when it comes to websites or just tech in general. These guys are going to get you squared away. Planetcom.ca. Go take a little peek, see what they're all about. Substack, free to subscribe to. And, it has been a busy stretch. I do not have to say that if one of the things I forgot to mention yesterday is I'm trying out this new thing where I, after I'm done an interview, Ken Rutherford told me I should just try it because he always says I summarize an episode really good. I don't know if that's true or not. But trying to get my insights out as soon as an episode's done, and I'm going to start putting that on Substack. And then just you guys tell me what you think. I would love to hear your thoughts. Maybe there's a little interaction we can get going there. Anyways, hop over to Substack. It's down in the show notes. If you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, X, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to leave a review. Tell a friend. Appreciate it. Now let's get on to that tale of the tape. The first is a Canadian police officer with the Edmonton Police Service. He's also the creator and host of the Quiet Professional podcast. The second, a former senior operations officer with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, where he served for 32 years, specializing in transnational organized crime, intelligence, and international hostage negotiations. I'm talking about Nathan Romas and Kelvin Chrustie. So buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Sean Newman podcast. Today I'm joined by Nathan Romas and Kelvin Chrustie. Boys, thanks for hopping on.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you as well.
Now, gentlemen, neither one of you have been on the podcast before, so what we do here is we got to tell a little bit of the origin story, and I love it when it's told from your perspective. So, Nathan, you were the first person I talked to. How about we start with you, and then we'll go to Kelvin after. Just a little bit of your background so the audience can know who the heck they're listening to today.
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with just saying Cal and I share similar origins. We're both from Winnipeg. So maybe that'll tell you the direction the podcast will go too. I don't know.
And we won't hold that against you. I'm originally from Saskatchewan. So we have thoughts on Manitoba. I'm kidding.
But I'm a police officer in Canada, and I will say my opinions or any views expressed here don't represent the police service. This is me on here by myself. So I'm current serving police officer, worked in patrol and gang unit, and now I'm promoted into a sergeant position, so overseeing some of the fine men and women on the street and what they're doing. And I'm also the creator and host of my own podcast, The Quiet Professional.
And one question on The Quiet Professional, if you don't mind, before we get to Kelvin. What is the theme of your podcast? Like, you're an active police officer hosting a podcast. I'm like, okay, what are your topics that you're bringing on? Like, are you talking about real life issues, or is it just more of behind the badge?
No, so it's kind of an everything and everything, Joe Rogan-esque, where we have different guests every week on there, but it can be everything from current events to politics, security. I do have pieces in there about leadership, which is a big topic I've been discussing lately, and also mental health. But it's just to help get a lot of people get their messages out. We talk about some of their books, their writing, that's aside from the current events. So it really does touch on a vast amount of topics, but I try to keep it some themes throughout a couple months, and then I'll switch to something else. So, yeah.
And Kelvin, yourself?
Well, I range from Winnipeg, as noted by Nathan, and very proud of that fact. Even though I've lived away from there for 35 years, I still refer to myself as hometown Winnipeg guy. I, like Nathan, joined the policing profession in 1985, proceeded through numerous functions, but a lot in the organized crime, investigative, and international world. Former peacekeeper several times, and also was Canada's team leader of terrorist negotiations. So I did a lot of overseas deployments for people kidnapped Canadians. And the last decade and a half or so was in our federal policing program out in Vancouver, working around the world, running what they called federal major projects as the OIC, targeting money launderers, cartels, triads, Iranian networks, drug enforcement around the world, working extremely closely with the Americans and our other allies. And then in 2018, left and went into the private sector, running a boutique security intelligence firm called the Critical Risk Team with several former military, several former intelligence and law enforcement personnel.
I know we're going to get into some heavy things, but if you're both from Winnipeg, are you both Jets fans then?
Yeah.
Is there any other hockey team? Seriously?
Oh, there is. But I mean,
grew
you
up
guys
without 'em,
are
yeah.
you guys are the top in the NHL or tied for the top. I think the Capitals are now tied. Anyways, that's a fun
Yeah.
one. Once upon a time, folks, I talked nothing but hockey. I'm just curious, two
Yeah,
Winnipeg
yeah.
guys. I'm like, the Jets
Yeah.
are doing pretty dang good.
Yeah, and my high school buddies and I are going back there to watch the Edmonton Oilers game in April. We're extremely excited to have a little bit of a boys' reunion back there, and courtesy of some of the Winnipeg Jets management have facilitated us getting some good tickets. So looking forward to it.
No, that's cool. Now, forgive me. You mentioned in there you negotiated with terrorists. I've seen a lot of movies, Calvin. I'm like, what does that mean?
That means we worked with the on behalf of Canadian government under the auspices of the RCMP, but with Global Affairs, Canadian Military, CSIS, and others, and we're deployed and engaged, attempting to resolve incidents involving terrorists kidnapping Canadians abroad. And sometimes, it was tough to tell whether they were terrorist incidents or criminal incidents. But the mandate was for terrorist incidents, and sometimes it was a blurry mandate. And so we would attempt to enter into dialogue with various entities and try to secure the release of Canadians. That's basically what we did.
I could spend way too much time on that topic, and I can hear the audience going, "Oh, do it," but I know we got a time frame today. So one of the things we talked about when we were aligning this was talking about the border crisis or the border issue, or however you guys want to term it. But essentially, it got highlighted by Donald Trump as fix your border, fix the fentanyl program, the fentanyl problem. And since then, we've had a border czar. We've had, Alberta station sheriffs in that range now creating a buffer zone. We've had, I don't know, is it 2 Blackhawks? Is it more Blackhawks? Just curious. When we're talking the border, don't feel like it has to come back to me. I'm just as curious as you two talking about this and seeing anything pops out to me. Just your thoughts, and maybe I'll start with Calvin on the border, and Nathan, please hop in at any point.
Yeah, so my thoughts are, a conversation that I always felt extremely comfortable talking about, except for probably in the last month, and largely due to the emotional issues attached to it currently of many on both sides of the border. I preface my remarks by saying that I don't obviously support the tariffs, and the impact it has on Canadians and where this has been and where this is going in terms of our relationships with the Americans. But I think it's really important for particularly Canadians in terms of understanding the border issues. While we may not appreciate the way that it's being articulated and the disrespect associated to some of the narrative coming out of the U.S. Historically, currently, there is a significant problem, I think, within Canada in terms of transnational organized crime, and the Americans know it. The second point worth mentioning is I've probably been interviewed 10 to 15 times in the last several weeks on the topic by media, and I have yet met a investigative journalist reporting on it that has actually read the executive order relative to the issues attached to the border. Thirdly, probably is most of the media reporting I've read and most of the public narrative, including the political rhetoric that's out there on both sides of the border, doesn't really truly reflect the content of the executive order. And if one reads the executive order, which I really encourage Canadians to take a look at, it's a much broader issue than X, kilos of fentanyl going south of the border. That is not what the order says. That's how it's been framed by politicians, particularly on the south side of the border. And I don't know, well, I'll say my humble opinion that the fact that it hasn't been corrected and clarified in terms of responses, I think is confusing Canadians. And I think, in fairness to Canadians, it probably should be provided a better explanation in terms of what's the content if they haven't read it. But it is worth.
If you don't mind, Calvin, you're gonna find a guy who hasn't read it on this side, and I'm curious how many listeners have actually read it. There will be some for sure, because there's a lot of smart people out there that are smarter than me. I say it all the time. I got an excellent audience that's well read and paying attention to a lot of things. But when you say, it's different than what's being talked about in the narrative, and the fact that none of the journalists, including myself, have read it. What does it actually say then?
So the content of it talks about the concern that Canada has not put the resources and or efforts into security issues, and a lot of it, because it's spread out through 20 sentences. But my synopsis of it relative to transnational organized crime. So they talk about synthetic drugs, other drugs, fentanyl, methamphetamine, cartels, etc. So when you start adding all those data points up, I'm not sure how anybody equates it to how many kilos go south of the border. Because when I added those data points up as a professional and somebody that has been in the business for decades, that's not what I assess what's being articulated legally, diplomatically in the legal order. And I think when you read it, I think it provides substance and tangible actions that, if Canadians wanted to, they could possibly and probably should say are real issues. Let's address them. Not because somebody south of the border said you must address them, but they are in the best interest of our kids. They are in the best interest of the mentally vulnerable. They are in the best interest of our own security. So let's just address them, irregardless of being compelled, extorted, or whatever else. I think there's value for Canadians to take a look at it.
And if I could jump in on that, Sean, I do kind of want to echo some of what Cal's saying, and this is a conversation I've had offline with him as well. I think you see too much emotion in a lot of the decisions and the reactions being made by everyone from the average Canadian all the way through the politicians. And it's that lack of critical thinking, the taking a second to just step back and remove yourself from the situation and actually gauge what's going on. On the reporting side too, because I have a lot of critiques of media because I deal with it almost every day, but I don't think the right questions are getting asked, or like Cal was saying, nobody's doing the digging. Like, where is the digging going on, and who's asking those questions? Like, what are we trying to get to here? Are we just trying to get a story out for the sake of getting it out? Are we just trying to generate headlines, or are we actually trying to help people? So I think a lot of that has been missing in the reporting that you see largely from mainstream media. Now, that's not to say there aren't good people out there. It's just, it seems like they either get drowned out or it's few and far between.
Yeah, and I just add to Sean's, I think, the issues are lost in clickbait media. And it's sad that the reality is, I've been, working with media for, the last 5, 6, 7 years. and everybody's story is always limited to time. And this is a super complex topic. And everybody tries to go, hey, we've got to do it in 500 words or 422 words or whatever it is. And nobody's really taken the time to fully articulate the complexity of it, the seriousness of it, and some of the realities of it. And I think that had somebody, or if somebody does that, it will allow Canadians, it will allow the private sector, it will allow others to get the proper narrative out. And if we get the proper narrative out, maybe we'll get at the beginning of fixing the issue and addressing the issues.
Well,
Here's a question for Nathan, but it's going to be I've never had to do this before, folks. You go, the right questions aren't getting asked. And I look at this and I'm like, okay, I got an active officer and I got a former 3+ decades officer underneath me. Sorry, folks, you can't see what I'm looking at. And I'm like, okay, well, to an active officer, what is the right question then today to ask of Calvin or of yourself that needs to get out there?
So one example that I've brought up, and I've talked about this even on social media and openly, is there was that record-setting drug bust in Toronto. I want to say it was 350 kilos. They had shelves of drugs laid out for the media shot. And in the article, I read that they knew the drugs were coming from Mexico. So the drugs crossed 2 international borders. They went through an entire U.S. country where they've got dozens upon dozens of agencies that could look into this to deal with it. Yet they somehow ended up in getting all the way into Canada, this massive load of drugs. Well, when I'm reading the article, and again, this is just taking a step back, saying how did that get all the way here? Why didn't they stop it down there? Why are we waiting till it gets to this point? Now, there could be a million reasons why, but none of that's really fleshed out in there. And as a journalist, I would think, or someone reporting in the room, I'd be like, you knew this was coming from Mexico. Did you talk to the DEA? Did you talk to Homeland? Nobody was willing to help. That's a part of the story to me. And I think they'd be hard pressed to say that any agency in the U.S. wasn't interested in 350 kilos or whatever it was. But it's just where are those questions? So we can do a little more. We could do a little more digging. And they're legitimate questions. I don't think they're going to make anybody angry, right? Sometimes you see out there, some people don't like to answer stuff, but I think it's a legitimate question.
So I guess where I sit then, I'm like, okay, this is kind of like the Jordan Peterson thing on a national scale. Well, his big thing is, before you go criticizing the world, clean up your room, right?
Yeah.
And if you're Canada, one of the things I think I'm hearing from the two of you is, well, Nathan, you just said that it crossed 2 international borders, so there's problems elsewhere. That shouldn't shock anyone. But we do have a problem here in Canada, do we not?
I think so. I feel safe saying that we definitely have a problem in Canada. Somebody in the U.S. has said long before the current administration came in here, that, hey, we have a problem. Other countries have said historically, you have a problem, and we know we have a problem. So we've got multiple people, saying, clean up your room, as you put it. And I've used that metaphor before. And for myself, I'm just perplexed why we don't clean up the room, because there's obvious, the first question is, hey, is the room dirty? Yes, it's dirty. Okay, how do you clean it up, and what do we need to do about it? Well, why don't we just, I think it's that simple. Let's just deal with it. But I think, there's lots of concerning issues in terms of why we haven't taken the money laundering issues, why we haven't taken synthetic drugs issues, why we haven't looked at the legal impediments to fix the issues, and a lot of them come back to the origin of politics, Canadians not wanting to, possibly change the law, maybe not change the policing structures, maybe because there's limited resources. And I think it comes down to, if you admit there's a problem, sometimes you're going to have to deal with the problem. And I think we have a problem. I think we need to fix the problem, and not because the U.S. said so, but because our kids deserve so.
Yeah.
What?
I was going to jump in real quick. If we see the argument is always they'll say how many kilos they're seizing at the Mexican border, then they'll talk about the Canadian side, and it's 40 pounds or whatever kilos they found in like a whole year. But our reaction up here is instantly to say, well, look at Mexico. Well, they're not, like, who cares about Mexico? They're addressing us and the problems we have up here. So why aren't we, as Cal is saying, why aren't we making change up here, fixing our own house? So whether that's legislatively or we need to look at some of the case law that is out there and re-examine it. And maybe we're not sending down so much hard bricks. Like, people like to get those pictures in their head, right? They like the photos. But we are a part of a supply chain. We are a part of a production chain. And there's been lots of articles on that where we are exporting to other parts of the world. So we're still involved, whether it's that exact, the finished product is seized at the border. It might not be that, but sometimes I think it doesn't get stated properly necessarily what you see on TV from whether it's the president or somebody, but they're not wrong in the general consensus of what they're saying. I think it just has to get framed a little better.
I'm curious if like one of the journalists who's been on the show, and then you've seen him everywhere when it comes to asking questions and pushing on this issue of the Canadian border, was Sam Cooper. What I assume both know who that is, but maybe I should just start there.
Yeah, we both are familiar with him.
What are your thoughts on Sam Cooper then? Talking about the money laundering and everything else being tied into politicians, being basically foreign entities really infiltrating different agencies as high up as the Prime Minister of Canada.
Here, I'm a big fan of Sam's investigative reporting, particularly in terms of the importance of the triads in terms of their involvement in Canada as being a major threat, both in Canada and abroad, and what Canada's role is. But I also think, that for me, where I see the biggest problem right now in terms of taking this issue on is the fusion of what Nathan identified of the emotional aspects of it.
Sure.
The other aspect is the politicalization of it. And I think we should get back to basics in terms of the social aspect, in terms of the social impact. Park all the political issues, because it did not take a political leader or a political party to bring us to this place. This has been going on since, 30 years plus. Since we brought the charter in, and it's created a fertile ground that enables these national and international threat actors to operate here with very minimal punity. And anybody in my former profession knows that the biggest impediment is the legal framework that we have. And anybody watching the media knows it's probably the most unstated issue, and anybody listening to the politicians know that it's the most unstated issue. But the practitioners, the police that are tasked with doing it, in fairness to them, I think they're doing an exceptional job, but they aren't really empowered to do it. So you don't send a soldier, to war without giving him a gun, and you don't give the police, and task them with a mission to go, hey, counter foreign threats, counter foreign transnational organized crime in Canada, and go, but we're not going to empower you through a legal framework. And there seems to be so much narrative, even from former people, from the 1980s or 1990s that were involved in this game, to kind of go, well, the tools are there, and they start blaming the police and police leadership and police that. That's not. I went through that transition, and I left in 2018. And when I left in 2018, the police are completely handicapped in terms of leveraging the tools to make consequences for these entities. And that's why, people look at, oh, hey, were the police better in the 90s than they were in 2018? I don't think so. I think the evolution of the law that they're working with has got to such a point that it has so many constraints on the police. The police are have a very difficult time to say that. And I know probably Nathan's sitting there going, I'm glad Kelvin said that. I can't. But I think we have to look at the judicial system as being a huge handicap. That's not to say we don't need more resources, particularly in federal policing. But I think that's an important part of the narrative that hasn't been clearly articulated.
I can add on to that. And it's certainly something I've spoken about a bunch of times on the show as well. But just about us being handcuffed, I think a lot of it too is the lack of consultation with the right people. So I was actually asking this of our legal advisors the other day, and just who exactly writes the laws, right? Like, and this is in a provincial context I was talking, but who writes the laws and who's involved in that? And, the answer never involved anybody at the ground level. So how do they know when they're writing the stuff out, how it's actually going to be implemented and what that'll look like? Like, why aren't we bringing in the right people to do some consultations? There are numerous issues to bring up that it would take a long time, but I guess to kind of keep it short, we just see that there's a lot of issues when it comes to things like implementing the law, and then even when it gets to court and when we try to run something through court, whether they have enough resources, enough time, experience. We have a lot of people who are not experienced in certain types of law, whether it's you're looking at like trademark infringements and stuff. It was a file I worked on where we had nobody in Alberta who could take on the file, so they had to consult all the way to Ontario, and I think there was like one or two people that even knew about this stuff in all of Canada. But that goes for a lot of other types of crime types, offenses that we deal with. We don't have a lot of the experts that we do need here.
Okay, Kelvin, you said something. I'm trying to keep my brain on task this morning, and you said something that I got to ask about. You mentioned, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that when the charter of the 1980s was put in place, it laid, and now this is probably my words, laid the groundwork for transnational or transcontinental, or however you put it, crime syndicates, crime organizations. Did I hear that correct?
Yeah, I would say it wasn't, probably didn't get picked up, automatically in terms of somebody sitting there reading it and going, hey, this is great. But the way the court cases rolled out and through the evolution of, the school of hard knocks, I think these transnational networks, foreign threat actors, have recognized, and the word's out there, not only on the street, but globally, that Canada provides a low risk, high profit capability. So if you're looking at it like from a mining company looking at, hey, do I go open a mine in Colombia, or do I open a mine in Venezuela? Well, Venezuela is a lot more unstable. It's a very high risk area due to crime, geopolitical threats, et cetera, et cetera. So do I open a mine and then I do business in Venezuela, or do I go somewhere a little more stable like Colombia? So what do the executives do? I'm going to open the mine in Colombia. So what does the triads do? What do the other networks? What do the cartels do? Okay, let's look. Do I operate in the U.S. In terms of our convergence hubs where we set up shop, in terms of transshipment, distribution, production, et cetera, or in the U.K., or in Australia, or do I do Canada? And I think Canada is seen as a low risk place of these businesses to do it. And if you look at a mining company, whatever their profits are, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or whatever else. But if you look at the Mexican cartels, the triads, or there's some of these others, we're talking in the billions and billions and billions. And to not give them the respect that to be able to do that, and I don't mean respect in terms of ethically, morally, but in terms of their operational capability. If you're moving billions of dollars, you've got some smart people that know how to move that money around, how to generate those profits. And you're going to have people looking at, the issues of risk management, just like any other corporation, to do it, because these are billions of dollars. And to get advice to go, hey, operate here, operate there. And I think for the last, 30 plus years or whatever it is since the charter, the way the case law has evolved and continues to be evolved, I think it's well known within these networks that, hey, Canada is a pretty safe place. And in fact, I would say that I know that as a fact.
I'm just curious. When it comes to the charter, why specifically that document and not, the 15 years prior to it? Like, what about that point changes the way case law starts to lay out and now, creates a landing strip or whatever analogy you want to put for these crime syndicates where they're like, like today's Canadian I think I can really understand. Like, we have, it feels like, and maybe once again, two cops on the show, maybe you can enlighten me, but it looks like you could get arrested for just about anything and you're out the next day in Canada. That's what it looks like. I'll let you two discuss that if you like. But first, what is it about the charter then that opens the grounds for where we're at today? If that's when you're pointing to instead of 1950, it's not 1950 you're pointing to. You're saying the 1980s, the charter. That's where this all changes. What is it about that?
Nathan, do you want to go or do you want me to go? Whatever works for you.
Yeah.
Man.
So I think one of the things I would say is just when you look at the charter, like it gives you those protections against unreasonable search and seizure. It's about privacy. So when you take like the average Joe out there, they might not be able to afford the expensive lawyers or have the millions and billions of dollars to go into arguing these things. The document does provide protection for everybody, and that's everyone. Now, when you take those organized crime groups and they have the really good lawyers who can make up all kinds of extravagant arguments and stuff, you're also affording that protection to them too. So that's how I would kind of look at it. If you want to add on, Cal?
Yeah, the second part is when you look at the policing structures in Canada, that are advising government on it, most of them are coming from the municipal provincial policing. There isn't a large representation of the federal policing apparatus at these national meetings. And then if there is, they're not always the ones that historically are in the trenches, sitting across the table in Los Angeles in a meeting, or in Sydney, Australia, or in Africa, or whatever else, when we're working with our partners. And the discussions are, we have this case. What are we going to do working with Canada, you Canadians on it? How should we approach this? And then they start assessing risk and cooperation, collaboration. And then in the middle of the conversations, usually at the front end, and actually, in fact, I'd suggest not even at the front end sometimes, before we even get to the table. And sometimes we don't even get into the table because you don't want to talk about it with us, is that we have this legal framework that's incongruent with their legal framework. And a lot of the world's, our partners, legal frameworks different than ours. And a lot of it's based on developing sensitive information through human assets, i.e. human sources, and they provide direction to the sources. They operate in Colombia, they operate in Mexico, their lives are at risk, they operate in the States or abroad somewhere else. And then they get into going, okay, we're going to do this with you, we want to work with Canada. And then all of a sudden the conversation comes out, well, our legal framework makes it almost impossible for us as policemen to guarantee that won't have to be disclosed. Because if you look at the provisions of the Canada Evidence Act, and not to get into the details, but the details, what counts
is what matter.
Is that the only person that can protect that and make the decision is a judge in the trial. Well, you're sitting there, with say a DA agent out of Miami that's a 32-year-old guy at the bottom of the food chain who's responsible legally, professionally, and ethically for the safety and well-being of that asset and his family or her family, and goes, well, do I really want to take that risk and have somebody disclosed in a court process or in an investigative process where it's all this bureaucracy going on, that goes, hey, I got to provide the name here, I got to provide this here, and don't want to, I don't understand that big bureaucracy north of the border, in terms of I have to put it on this report. They don't operate like that. And as a former source handler and a former agent handler myself, it poses a lot of risk to the individuals that are in the system. And aside from the human sources, if they have other operations with police officers engaged, running undercover covert operations in the Middle East or Africa, like these are super high risk operations. It's like, yeah, but you have to disclose that, part of the Canadian process. We'll try to keep it, but it's not really our final decision on it. That doesn't go well, in the international policing community. And the people, advising, Justice Canada and all the other people, and I've talked to a lot of these people when I was in and then when I've been out, they don't understand the nuances of the operations, how that applies. They think of it as 4 lawyers sitting around a table in Ottawa going, here's this theoretical model that we think should work based on reading the policy procedures and the legal framework. But when you're in reality and you're sitting in Miami or you're sitting in Colombia, it does not work at all. And we have an international reputation, Canada does, in terms of law enforcement, that our partners and allies around the world know that it doesn't give them the confidence to work with us to the degree that we need them to work with us.
And I think it was David Asher. He brought this up when he talked on CBC. This was like the early days of the tariffs going on and what exactly it was about. And he brought this up. And I mean, he is or I don't know if he still currently is, but he was an advisor to Trump, and he worked a few big cases, TD Bank and their $3 billion fine. Like he was part of that. So he said all that on CBC. Obviously, Cal gives you better detail, the behind the scenes, but this is the stuff that's missing out there, right? We don't get that on a 30-second clip on CBC. So just wanted to point that out. Like this stuff has been mentioned, but it's just not as detailed. And the little bits like Cal is giving here have been missing out there.
And if I could, Sean, as you're processing with a degree of confusion, maybe because it is complex, is that soon as you bring that context up in a room of former lawyers who see the benefits, and don't get me wrong, there's a ton of benefits. I really appreciate the charter, but the world has changed and evolved through globalization. The sophistication of the threat actors has, the threat itself has escalated, tenfold. And it's not that, hey, let's get rid of the charter because the politicians go, oh, somebody's talking charter. Oh, that equates to electoral, losses if I bring and raise that issue up. But what I think that's required is a genuine conversation with the people that Nathan said, the people that are dealing with these issues in foreign operations with our foreign partners, and go, hey, can we modify this 1% of the charter to allow some exceptions or some operational practicality to it? But those little nuances create massive problems in terms of leveraging theory, the butterfly theory, that just sparks a whole level of cooperation issues and impediments for us to tackle these. And if you read the executive order that we were talking about at the beginning of the show, you'll see that's how it's framed in there. They want better cooperation, more of this, more of that. But on the American side, I don't think they quite understand what all these problems are. But being the guy that sat at that table hundreds of times with our foreign partners, it's a real issue. And I think we just have to have a conversation about it and go, hey, we don't have to throw out the whole charter. I admit there's tons of benefits to it and we need to keep it. But should we look at modernizing it, appreciating that was 30, 40 years ago, and the world's drastically changed since, and in the best interest of Canadians and protecting our youth and mentally vulnerable and our national security, do we need to make some modifications? I think that it's absolutely 110% yes.
And Sean,
sure.
yeah. I would say on that, I think what people don't realize, and I'm glad Cal actually, he must be reading my mind because he went back to this. When we're talking about like the executive orders and stuff, or even reading through laws, there's what I think gets lost on people is there's the interpretation of it, and then there's the implementation of what that's actually going to look like. So we have people drafting things kind of separate from that, and it's missing that part. But also when people go and read, like if you go read the orders, and this is something that Cal does very well, is having some humility to this, is saying like, this is my assessment, but it's not the gospel truth and it's not the end all be all. And I think that is missing from a lot of that stuff as well. So just caution people when they go read it, try to understand it, but also seek out more knowledge around that. Like when you read it, how does that actually work? What does it look like if it's implemented? Again, it takes time.
And I think, Sean, just to build upon that, because I think it's a super good point, is I have rarely met somebody from the judicial system or high up in government, or even in policing for that matter, that say has worked in provincial policing or have worked in city policing, that understand what I say, because it doesn't sound like that big of a deal. But if you're in the federal, international world working with our partners, you see, like it's a problem in those other policing lines for sure, but it's probably more manageable. But when you get into the international game, it's kind of like I hate to say this, and I don't mean any less or one being better or different, but the sophistication of the players, the seriousness of the threats that make crime a national security issue, not just a public safety issue, that unless you've been in the game, unless you've been at the table hundreds of times with the DEA or with the Australian Federal Police or with Scotland Yard or working in Africa or the Middle East or wherever else, tackling these high-level threats that are in the profits of the billions with the cartels and others, that's a whole different game. That's, we'll go back to that's hockey. And some of this other stuff is like ping pong, and you can't compare the two. These guys are so sophisticated, so structured, so intelligent, and so many resources, lawyers, accountants, business leaders, and that behind them. You are not going to outsmart these guys and apply a legal framework from the 80s to these massive,
If I may, my brain goes to solutions, right?
Yeah.
One of the things my wife always gets on me is sometimes I just want to fix a problem instead of listening, and I'm like,
Yeah.
fair. So when I'm listening to you two, one of the things I hear is, and maybe I'm wrong, and you guys can clarify this for me, but you're talking about adjusting the charter, right? Because if you do that, then there's ways, or maybe just adjusting the framework so you can work with international organizations to go after the problem. And then I think, okay, well, of all the conversations I've had on here, that's a tall ask. That isn't as simple as, you get a judge to sign off and all of a sudden you can just walk in and redo the framework. It's almost an impossible ask, which then leads me to think, like, this doesn't get solved anytime soon. Or am I wrong on that? And you're like, oh, no, actually, there's a simple thing we can do. Boom, 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 and off we're running.
Maybe I'll start real quick because I know Cal will give a way better answer than I will. But I think one of the issues you would have, like you're saying there, Sean, is, the public, like how that would even be framed to the public. And I think instantly people would go straight to the conspiracy theory, maybe not so stretched out, but they would instantly think it's like, they're coming for us. And it would take a really strong politician with a lot of fortitude and a lot of willpower to want to make that change. It's just, where do you find that person? So yeah, go ahead there, Cal.
Yeah, I don't think I think politically it's a huge issue. I think legally it's probably a medium-sized issue. But when you have, 50,000 dead kids, with intentional poisoning from fentanyl, I'm not talking accidental. The people that are moving this stuff, knowing they're putting fentanyl in it, I mean, at what point does the threshold go? How big of a problem is it? And I think what we've seen south of the border, they're going, okay, it's crossed that threshold. And they're equal to Canadians in terms of per capita, in terms of deaths. So Canadians may need to go, at some point, when is the political skills balance going to equate or create a environment where a politician's going to go, okay, I'm going to take this issue on. 50,000 intentionally poisoned kids and the families devastated by it is too much. Then you add
this 50,000, Cal. What are you talking to specifically?
So that's the statistics in terms of the number of poisonings of fentanyl in Canada in the last 5 years. In the U.S., it's 500,000, so 500,000. So if you equate, and I know people find this, and I don't mean to dishonor anyone, but that's the same number of deaths, that came from World War II in Canada. And when we know that there's threat actors that are intentionally peddling this, I think at some point we have to be going, when is too much too much? And if this was, some other type of criminal activity, because a lot of these people that are dying of fentanyl come from respected families, perhaps have an anxiety disorder, some, functional mental health order that are self-medicating and getting into this situation. They're not all bad, nasty people. The vast majority of them I put in the category of victims, and they don't even know what they're taking when they take it, versus somebody saying, oh, well, they knew what they're taking. No, they didn't know what they were taking. They were self-medicating, thinking it was X or Y or whatever else. They have addiction problems, which usually are driven by mental health issues. So I think it's not that big of a fix. And I don't think it's just the drug issues alone. This impedes the espionage issues in Canada, the electoral interference, any foreign operation where it's sharing information relative to our international partners. These legal frameworks have an impact on it. So, transnational repression, i.e. foreign states, threatening the diasporic community and others within Canada, all these threat activities from foreign entities, this legal framework impacts it. It's not just the drug trafficking, not just the fentanyl, and it really equates to the national security. And I think we just have to recognize that no longer are global conflicts, fought through kinetic military means. We saw it in the hearings in Ottawa. There's threats to the judicial or to the political system. There's threats to the youth in terms of, the fentanyl, and the list goes on to industry, to universities. It goes on and on to our whole societies impacted by this legal problem.
So I would say it doesn't even have to get that complicated. So for even your listeners, Sean, at the ground level, just as we see, people always think like the cartel are here. They're always asking that. And if they don't see a face tatted Hispanic person walking around, they don't think that's the cartel then. And it's like, these guys wear suits now, right? Like it's just kind of an out of sight, out of mind thing. Like people have a certain image because of movies and different things in their head. But we even see this, so I'd say there's some politicians think like that. Much of the public thinks like that. But we even have police officers, law enforcement that think like that. And there was an article out several months back now, and it was talking about cartel connected to Red Alert, which is a street gang in Edmonton. And I remember having conversations with police officers up here who were like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, that's not even a thing. Like, why would the cartel deal with Red Alert? And it's like, it's not a far logical leap, whether it's cartel deal to Hells Angels who then push it down to the street gangs. But even within policing, we see the lack of awareness and the lack of education on these things, and just how even in our small little city, the links that are there. Now you expand that to an even greater picture. You want to talk into the geopolitics of it all. It just gets further and further complicated.
I'm stuck on, is there a solution? And I don't know if I've heard a good answer, and I don't mean that any harp on either one of you, just to the problem we face, because fire away.
You know what, and maybe I'll say for the solutions thing, I think it's definitely not a black and white thing. It's not a, here's your answer and that's it. As all things in law enforcement, it depends. And this here, some people who do really good discussions on this would be like Scott McGregor, Cynthia Alcon. There's a few other people I've chatted with about this, and framing the problems as complicated or complex without getting too deep into the discussion. I think we have to look at this as a complex problem where just changing one thing doesn't guarantee us a solution that or the outcome we're looking for. There's a whole constellation of factors that are constantly moving around, right? I kind of describe it as like a spider web overlaid of a spider web, and you've got multiple layers of them. And you just have to kind of keep it. It's a problem that'll never go away. And you kind of have to just keep steering it in the right direction of where you want it to go. And it involves having the right people in the room with the right intentions. But it's very hard to frame it as, well, we're just going to do this, and then that'll put a cap on it. I would say that's not possible in a lot of sense. It's more nuanced, it is much more in depth, where you're just trying to guide things in the direction you want it to go, and we're doing the best with what we can. It can get better, but I think people just look too much for like the definitive answer. I don't think that's possible.
I'm going to go a little against the grain of Nathan, only from the foreign threat activity. To your point, Sean, I think then Canadians, just like any other one, I look at Canadians almost like culturally like teenagers going, I don't want to change. Okay, then suffer the consequences. Then just accept the realities. You get 25% tariffs. I'm not saying they're not being weaponized, for economic nefarious purposes or whatever else. But this isn't a U.S. issue. Like when I first became aware the seriousness of the concerns that was having an impact on another nation, it wasn't Canada, it was Australia. They were just getting crushed. I think there's journalistic reporting that 6 metric tons of methamphetamine went from Vancouver to Australia in the last years, reported in the papers. That's just what got caught. So if that's what's got caught, times that by 2, 3, 4, 10, whatever, that's a significant amount. So if Canada wants to not have consequences, for it, I just look back at the last year. I've had TV stations, news producers from Belgium, Amsterdam, France, Australia, the US, all coming talking about Canadian problems. Yesterday it was Japan wants to do a TV story on Canada as a problem. This is not a Canada-US issue. This is a Canada issue. And so when people say, Sean, this sounds like it's not solvable, I say to Canada, perhaps Canada, take a good look in the mirror and go, culturally, Are we a culture that don't know how to fix a problem? Are we a solution-free country? Do we not take things seriously? And I say, take a look in the mirror and go, why are we having problems? Like a teenager going, well, why are you picking on me? Why? I don't know. Take a look in the mirror and figure out why Australia has issues with you and other countries have articulated this issue historically. It's not because per me, maybe we just need to fix some things. Other nations have legal systems, Sean. I share. The UK does, Australia does, the US does, other free and democratic societies do. So why are we making excuses? Surely there's a fix there somewhere where we can enter into at least the process to reflect on it, to look at it and go, is there a fix? Rather than saying, no, it's this Bible-like entity called the Charter, and nobody wants to touch it. And I say they only don't want to touch it because politically, it's not practically. I think there's practical solutions in there. I think the impediment is politically. Who wants to go venture, have that conversation and go this? But I think our allies would be extremely grateful to us if we went, hey, let's have a working group, on the Charter in terms of how it impacts, like the legal impediments. What do the police need? What do the intelligence systems need? What does the military need legally to work in this world that we're living in 2025, which is very polarized, very dangerous? What do those people that Nathan identified as the operators, forget the executives, remove them from the room, what do they need to do the job to protect and execute their mandate and protect Canadians from these foreign threats? Let's hear about it. And I think, to be quite frank, every other countries or most countries have found solutions. So why are we saying Canada can't find a solution? I think because Canadians probably don't understand there is a problem. So I think part of the solution is education and awareness, because I think most Canadians, Sean, don't really understand how serious of a problem this is. And I think it's a very serious problem.
I know we only got a minute or two left.
Yeah.
But on this show, I'm like, if there's one thing that these listeners know is there is a problem. And the problem they have is our government is tied up in not getting anything done. And so when I listen to you two go back and forth, I'm like, we got a country to the south of us that's saying clean up your act or else. And when I listen to you both, I'm like, our issue is, whether it's the Charter or just, I don't know what a police officer would say, give me these things so I can go kick down a door and arrest bad guys and put them away so that they know this isn't allowed in our country, our province, our city, to whatever level you want to put it, I'm good with. But the audience is like, I don't know. I keep watching this and I'm like, it feels like our government does, you talk political will. I'm like, oh man, like, I don't know what we can get put through our government at this point. I watch what's going on and I just feel like nothing's going to get changed anytime soon.
So if I may respond to that quickly, we live in a democracy. It's not a spectator sport. So I feel for the politicians that perhaps they don't have the support of the public. The public needs to accept that we live in a democracy. The public, we own this issue. It's not the police that own it. It's not the politicians own it. It's all society. And I think society has to take responsibility for it and start engaging in the democratic processes, including supporting the police, supporting the politicians to make these changes. Democracy, again, is not a spectator sport.
But I agree with you, but to me, when I watch, and maybe I'm wrong, once again, I give all the credit to you two. You're the guys who have been in this realm of law enforcement. So, forgive me, I'm just a hockey player podcaster who's just continued to level up his game on interviewing a ton of people. But
you ask questions, and a lot don't.
Well, to me, it's politicians who keep forcing some of this BS on us. When you talk about drugs, I don't, are there people loud about, hey, we need to do this and we need to this? I see it as politicians doing it. I think if a politician walked out and said, listen, we're cracking down on crime tomorrow, the population as a whole, at least here in Alberta, would be like, thank you. Could we just lock up some bad guys already? Could we just do that and get away from all this nonsense about drugs and like the criminal element that just seems like it's so prevalent? And we can go whichever way you want on that. But like, to me, it looks like it's the governments that are putting in, not the population that's going, we need free drugs. We need more fentanyl. We need laxer rules on people that are doing nefarious things. I don't see that from the population. But you two are law enforcement. Maybe you can be like, Sean, you're missing this and this and this. I'm totally open to it. That's one of the interesting things about this conversation.
It might be too big for the time we have left. It's a whole nother discussion we'd have to do on that one. I think the biggest thing on that is, at least, you're asking the questions and you're putting that information out there, and we're moving things in a direction that we need to by having these conversations. Yeah.
You're right on time. I kept us over. Kelvin, appreciate you giving us time today. Same thing, Nathan. Appreciate you guys hopping on today.
Thanks, Sean.
And maybe we'll continue this discussion at a different time.
Yeah.